Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has been forced into a U-turn over last week's budget plan to increase national insurance contributions for some self-employed people. It follows a backlash both inside and outside Parliament. Several Tory backbenchers had joined in the criticism, leaving Mr Hammond and Theresa May under fire for breaking a manifesto pledge. Today, Labour called it a humiliating climb down. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
If number 11 is your front door, changing your mind about what's in the box is a very big deal. Shifting only a week after your Kodak moment. Embarrassing indeed. Your Treasury colleagues, 7 days later, keeping stum.
Does this represent a U-turn by the government?
Excuse me?
Was the Chancellor wrong?
Worse still, when it's your boss who makes the announcement at the biggest political event of the week.
Questions to the Prime Minister.
The trend towards greater self-employment does create a structural issue in the tax base. We will bring forward further proposals, but we will not bring forward increases to NICs later in this Parliament.
Tax hikes for 2 million self-employed people, suddenly completely off.
We've just heard the Prime Minister is about to drop the national insurance hike announced only a week ago. Seems to me like a government in a bit of chaos in here.
The PM and her next-door neighbour hardly looked too concerned.
A budget that unravels in 7 days.
But the idea would have broken a Tory manifesto promise, and they were then lambasted for a total change of heart.
Does she agree that government should stick to their manifesto promises? And if so, she cannot object to the First Minister sticking to hers.
Is that why they want to abolish spring budgets? Because they just keep ripping them up?
Number 11 and number 10 only made the decision at 8 a.m. this morning, choosing humiliation today.
How humiliating is this tax U-turn for the Chancellor?
Ask the Chancellor.
Over a row that could have run for months.
Can the Chancellor stay in post?
The man himself, charged with managing the nation's accounts, had to explain how his careful spreadsheet calculations failed the political test.
This government sets great store in the faith and trust of the British people, especially as we embark on the process of negotiating our exit from the European Union. By making this change today, we are listening to our colleagues and demonstrating our determination to fulfil both the letter and the spirit of our manifesto tax commitments.
Number 11 had defended the idea. Number 10 had done too. But the atmosphere soured over the weekend. Sources suggest on Monday, a group of senior MPs told Theresa May the idea wouldn't wash. So today, in a move one former minister branded as extraordinary, suddenly the plan was gone.
We made it very clear that it was not something we were going to support. We'd campaign against it, we'd vote against it, and they listened to us. So I think it's shown in some ways he's a strong Chancellor in the sense of he's admitted he's made a mistake and he's done the U-turn, so I'm delighted.
The ground hadn't been that well prepared. The mathematics didn't add up in terms of getting the votes for the legislation that would have been needed. So what we've got is a delay, and I suspect some hard thinking about what the best way forward is, but we will have to tackle the problem.
He doesn't look that bothered, strolling in the sun on his way back to his political home. But chancellors have to be trusted.
Humiliated today, Chancellor.
Reputations round here are hard won and easy to lose. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the scrapping of the rise in national insurance contributions leaves a big hole in the Chancellor's budget plans for the next few years. Mr Hammond has already pledged to increase spending on social care. So where does today's U-turn leave the public finances? Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
It was a tax rise and a gift to the headline writers. The Chancellor knew he had a problem when he sat down to breakfast the day after the budget, faced with an avalanche of negative publicity. He was trying to tackle this issue, the new world of work and the growth in the number of self-employed who are taxed less than employees. Many supported the increase in national insurance contributions and expressed their disappointment that today politics seems to have trumped economics.
This is a disappointing move that the increase in Class 4 national insurance won't be going ahead, because that increase closed some of the discrepancies between employees and the self-employed in our tax system, and it largely hit the better off self-employed, with the lowest earning self-employed not losing at all.
This was Philip Hammond's rather neat budget plan a week ago. He made 3 big spending commitments: more money on social care, £2.4 billion, and more money for business rate relief and education. That came in at about £1.4 billion. It was claimed that those costs would be balanced by 2 big tax rises: a £2.6 billion tax rise on dividends from shares people own as an investment, and the controversial one, a £2 billion increase in national insurance contributions from the self-employed. That has now been scrapped, leaving Mr Hammond with a government finances headache.
Good morning. Hi.
The big promise at the last election: this government would not raise direct taxes, so limiting its room for manoeuvre. A problem summed up in a tweet this afternoon by the government's own employment advisor, Matthew Taylor. Let's hope big political learning from the national insurance episode is the danger of making blanket manifesto tax pledges to try to embarrass opponents. Many others agree.
It was never sensible to put in a manifesto a pledge that you wouldn't increase rates of national insurance or income tax or VAT. Those are the 3 biggest taxes that we have by far. To tie your hands for 5 years for those 3 big taxes never looked like a sensible thing to do.
He's not the first, and he won't be the last Chancellor to see a budget unravel over failures to see political elephant traps ahead. Mr Hammond has said he will fill the £2 billion black hole caused by today's U-turn at the next budget in the autumn. It is, for the moment, completely unclear how. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
And Laura is in Downing Street for us. Laura, just how damaging is this, not just for the Chancellor, but for the Prime Minister herself?
Well, George, it doesn't exactly smack of competence in government, or indeed peace and harmony here in Downing Street, does it? And the interesting thing, one of the difficult things I think for Theresa May and Philip Hammond, is inside the Conservative Party there isn't even an agreement over whether this was a good thing to do, to drop these plans. One senior Tory told me today it'd been madness in the first place to introduce this idea, but on the other side, one senior MP told me they were livid that the government had dropped this because it creates an impression that they can be pushed around by relatively small groups of people who are objecting. I think in the whole, though, when it comes to a policy that a government puts out there, and frankly it looks like it's not going to fly, they have 2 choices. Do they let it drag on for months and months, causing political damage day after day, or do they rip the plaster off, get the pain out of the way quickly? And I think here in Downing Street that is clearly what they have decided to do. But no question about it, particularly for a Chancellor whose job, perhaps above all else, is to be trusted, to be a safe pair of hands. This has not been a good day at the office, and it won't be forgotten very fast.
Laura, thank you.
Now, just a week after his very first budget, an embarrassing U-turn by the Chancellor as he dropped plans to increase national insurance for the self-employed. Philip Hammond had been facing an outcry over the tax hike, including from many Tory MPs who accused him of breaking a manifesto pledge. In the Commons, Labour described it as chaos, calling the climb down shocking and humiliating. And it leaves the Treasury with a £2 billion black hole to fill, as our political editor Gary Gibbon reports.
1 week after the budget, the second biggest money-raising measure has fallen apart. The government thought it could get away with raising national insurance for self-employed workers, even though the Tories won the last election, promising no rises in national insurance.
No increase in national insurance, what it says right there on that pledge card.
Since the budget, parliamentary colleagues and others have questioned whether the proposed increase in Class 4 contributions have questioned whether the proposed increase in Class 4 contributions is compatible with the tax lock commitments made in our 2015 manifesto.
They most certainly did. Mr Hammond thought he'd get away with it because after the election the government tried to retrospectively exclude self-employed national insurance charges from the pledge.
It is clear from discussions with colleagues over the last few days that this legislative test of the manifesto commitment Mr. Speaker, does not meet a wider understanding of the spirit of that commitment.
One government source says 2 days before the budget, Number 10 got worried about the national insurance charge, asked the Treasury to drop it. The Treasury said, find $2 billion somewhere else, and we will. Not surprisingly, Number 10 couldn't rustle that up, and the measure went ahead. Philip Hammond skipped lightly through the national insurance changes when he was reading out the budget. Some Tory MPs were soon attacking the policy. On Thursday morning, government-friendly newspapers joined in the attack. In Brussels that evening, the Prime Minister said there was no rush and there could be changes to the measures.
What we will do this summer is publish a paper which will explain the full effects of the changes.
In the Sunday Times, Treasury sources were quoted calling Number 10 economically illiterate. And earlier today, Number 10 effectively withdrew its support for the measure.
I think he's a strong Chancellor because he's actually stood up and said he made a mistake.
He's not a strong Chancellor. You just defeated him within a week.
Well, I think he stood up and accepted he made a mistake. So I'm going to be very polite and say that I think he's a strong Chancellor.
Earlier at Prime Minister's questions, Theresa May defended the climb down.
We will bring forward further proposals, but we will not bring forward increases to NICs later in this Parliament.
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, we've just heard the Prime Minister is about to drop the national insurance hike announced only a week ago. Seems to me like a government in a bit of chaos in here. A budget that unravels in 7 days. A Conservative manifesto with a very pensive Prime Minister on the front page saying there would be no increase. A week ago, an increase was announced.
Jeremy Corbyn said there was now a £2 billion black hole in the Chancellor's budget numbers. Think tanks who praised the national insurance change last week as a fair cut to the tax perks of the self-employed today said Tory election pledges on tax and ring-fenced spending meant room for manoeuvre was now very limited.
They are hemmed in where they actually want to fund budgets year on year without actually borrowing more. And they're hemmed in because they've ruled out any further benefit cuts. They're now, from the experience of the last week, probably pretty scared about going ahead with tax rises. There's not that many other things you can do. We're not going to cut the NHS. So we are basically looking at a small range of options the government has left if it wants to raise money.
The change that's just been ditched was a simplification, something that made things more efficient and something that made things more equitable. If you can't do that, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do very much, certainly over the next 3 years.
Philip Hammond left the Commons a reduced figure. He signed up to a climb down, but it wasn't his idea. And on top of all that, he's got to find more cash to plug a hole in his spreadsheets.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative MP Anne-Marie Trevelyan and the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Debbie Abrahams. I started by asking Anne-Marie Trevelyan if the government has come to grief on a small budget like this, how on earth will they manage Brexit?
I thought that overall it was a really sound budget. It was sensible, planning ahead, and my concern was this one small part of it with the national insurance contributions hike for the self-employed, which I felt was just wrong and out of kilter, and I'm really pleased that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have listened to the concerns that both colleagues and those in the Federation of Small Businesses from across the country have raised, and that we've reversed the decision.
Wrong because it was the wrong measure, or because it breached a pledge that you had made at the general election not to raise taxes?
Well, a combination of the two. My leaflets went out which said we will not put up national insurance contributions or taxes. That's what my electors believed to be the case. We could, dance on the head of a pin about whether that meant class 1 or class 4. That wasn't really the point. And politics isn't only about detail, it's about knowing what you buy into. And I'm really pleased that the Chancellor today, stated that he understood that.
But the truth is that both front benches have looked in absolute shambles over this. Jeremy Corbyn didn't spot this the first day it was announced
not true.
during...
That's not
well,
true,
not
John.
properly.
That's
Look, I
not
mean,
true. No,
look,
it's not
everyone
true.
was shouting. We could all see it, and he didn't. And, and then even today, frankly, he wasn't ready for the reversal.
No, that's absolutely not true. First of all, you'll have probably heard that Philip Hammond even acknowledged that last year, in conjunction with the Federation for Small Business, we set up a self-employment commission which is looking at this. But what Mr. Hammond didn't say was that we want to make sure that there is fairness in this, absolutely no fairness in the budget. Make sure that if we are looking at the changes in tax that need to be introduced, we also need to make sure that there's proper access, full access to the social security support system.
But this was not brought about by Labour Party pressure, not brought about by a savaging by Jeremy Corbyn. This has been brought about by Tory backbenchers. This had nothing to do with opposition at all. You lot are a complete shambles at the moment.
I couldn't disagree with you more, John. We mentioned it very clearly, and as I say, we were ahead of the game last November, setting up this self-employment commission. We have a huge amount of support, as we have done in the past, and we'll be looking at all of the issues that self-employed people face in the round.
But Anne-Marie Trevelyan, what this budget has told us is that if Philip Hammond dares come back in the autumn with any extra taxation, you're going to be down his throat like a rabbit.
Well, yes, if he's going to increase taxation on those for whom that's not the way to do it. What we need to make sure is that those who are, as Debbie says, doing things which are not actually within the spirit of the law, where HMRC should be working harder to make sure that what is actually employment is employment, that's where we see it, and that's where employers should well be paying that 13.10%, which they're not at the moment. We have to get that right, and HMRC has a big piece of work to do, and I hope the Chancellor will be pushing them very hard to do it.
Well, one other matter, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the CPS have said that they're looking now at 11 constituencies over the expenses scandal. You must be a bit shocked to find your party in this situation.
I think the whole situation is very difficult, and I hope very much that it will be resolved this week. I understand from colleagues that we are into that stage, and that the party chairman will be doing all he can to make sure that the right outcome, and that those MPs who did nothing wrong, they followed the appropriate electoral law, have this really difficult pressure taken off them, and that there is a full and satisfactory conclusion to the whole process.
So you see the party as having put them in difficulties, not they themselves?
Well, the issue of the bus and that being national spending was very clearly made at the time, and we need to make sure that all parties get that through the system, and that actually we have a fair and satisfactory conclusion, which means that those MPs who did nothing wrong, whose election expenses are absolutely, as the rest of ours were, are not tarnished. I think it's been a very difficult time for them, and I hope this will be resolved very quickly.
Nevertheless, you must be worried that there is the possibility of by-elections and all sorts of other things that follow.
Well, let's wait and see how it progresses this week.
Anne-Marie Trevelyan and Debbie Abrahams talking to me earlier. Gary joins us now from Westminster. Gary, let's just get back to the Chancellor, because this is a bit of a reversal. I mean, how bad is it for the government?
Well, it's interesting hearing Anne-Marie Trevelyan there saying that she quite liked the rest of the budget. There wasn't much else in it. This was the second biggest revenue raising item, national insurance charges for the self-employed, that was in this document, and to lose it is therefore painful, because it's a big percentage of what was on offer there. It shows that ministers can be pushed around by backbenchers, particularly when backbenchers are allied with government-supporting newspapers. And I think we've seen some tensions between number 10 and number 11. They're being downplayed tonight by spokespeople for both sides, but you just need to see the reaction to the headlines that were around on Sunday, with people briefing against each other, and you sensed real tension there. One person even said to me there was an element of revenge to what we saw today in terms of number 10 and number 11. All of this, of course, happening at a time when the Prime Minister is having to get ready for her response to the Scottish Parliament vote next week, which will undoubtedly approve Nicola Sturgeon's plans for a second independence referendum. The Prime Minister's got to work out exactly how she is going to phrase her response to that. We're also, of course, approaching Brexit. It looks as though the date penciled in for that is the Wednesday the 29th of March for the Article 50 letter to go across to Brussels. And we got a flavour of a little more of the tension there today with Donald Tusk, the European Council President, saying that Europe will not be intimidated by Britain. All of this. And then you have the story that Michael's been looking into for so long. A dozen or so files going to the CPS, which are leaving a dozen or so MPs extremely uneasy. You have to say at a point like this, for Theresa May, the in-tray on the desk in number 10 looks less like an in-tray, more like a sort of lava-spewing volcano.
Carrie Gibbon at Westminster. It's interesting that when I pre-recorded the interview with Ms Trevelyan, of course the figure was only 11, it's 12 now, and it may be more by the time we end the programme. Cathy.
Indeed, we'll keep you posted.
It is almost certainly Theresa May's worst day in office since becoming Prime Minister. Her Chancellor's budget is tonight in tatters after Philip Hammond abandoned plans to raise national insurance. The Crown Prosecution Service has now received files from 12 police forces regarding election expenses. And the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, today admitted that no assessment had been made of the impact on the UK of leaving the EU without a deal. The first of our reports comes tonight from our political editor, Faisal Islam.
These days, a week is a very long time at the Treasury.
The main rate of Class 4 NICs for the self-employed will increase by 1% to 10%.
This budget measure didn't quite last the full 7 days.
I have decided not to proceed with the Class 4 NICs measures set out in the budget. There will be no increases in national insurance contribution rates in this Parliament.
The Chancellor forced into a dramatic U-turn on its second biggest revenue raiser.
If the Chancellor had spent less time writing stale jokes for his speech, and the Prime Minister less time guffawing like a feeding seal on those benches, we would have not have been landed in this mess.
The morning after the budget, the Chancellor under pressure on Sky News.
You've broken a Conservative Party manifesto pledge, haven't you?
Well, I don't accept that.
And later on, the Prime Minister still defending this budget measure in Brussels.
The manifesto was very clear, Prime Minister. 5 times it said that national insurance wouldn't be raised.
At the time, it was made very clear that it was that legislation that was delivering on our manifesto commitment, and there were no amendments and no concerns raised.
At Prime Minister's questions, Jeremy Corbyn leaving the heavy lifting on this to the SNP.
Seems to me like a government in a bit of chaos in here.
I normally stand at this dispatch box and say I won't take any lectures from the right honourable gentleman. When it comes to lectures on chaos, he'd be the first person I turn to.
We once had a Prime Minister who said that the lady's not for turning. My goodness. Isn't it welcome that the Prime Minister today has admitted she is for turning with her screeching, embarrassing U-turn on national insurance?
Now, it is tricky enough to have to abandon a major policy in your debut budget. But consider this, the same thing happened in the last budget. After 4 days, the disability cuts scrapped. And in the budget before, after 4 months, the tax credit cuts scrapped. It's starting to look like a pattern of behaviour in these things. And the irony is, they still seem to back the philosophy behind the policy.
Last week, Sky News met Victor Nix, an internet entrepreneur and occasional Uber driver, stung by the hikes in NI, but an unexpected response.
Victor, thanks for letting us back in your car. We spoke to you last week. You said it was a tax on entrepreneurship. Must be delighted by this U-turn.
When people are spending more time to write good jokes than getting their numbers straight, that's not a safe and predictable place for any business.
That's funny. I thought you'd be very happy with this.
Again, as a selfish individual, I could be, but I'm also part of this society, and also our business try to grow in this beautiful country.
Roadworks at the Treasury necessitating an about turn, turning a fiscally neutral budget into a small giveaway. How is this hole now to be filled? Faisal Islam, Sky News.
I've been getting away with it all.